The streets were empty as rain poured down, transforming the city into a blur of lights and puddles. In the distance, the hum of passing cars echoed through the silence. As Thomas Cruise, a seasoned taxi driver, maneuvered his cab through the slick streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. It wasn't the first time he had driven through these empty, rain-soaked roads, but tonight, something felt off, like fate was pulling at the strings of a universe. Then, out of nowhere, a small figure appeared on the sidewalk.
A child.
Alone. His headlights caught her first, a little girl, no more than 8 or 9, drenched to the bone. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with fear. She looked lost, vulnerable, and desperate. Thomas slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet road as he pulled up beside her. The girl didn't hesitate. She opened the door and climbed in, shivering from the cold. "Where are you going?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle, yet filled with concern. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something in them, something he couldn't explain. I'm looking for my mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. Little did Thomas know, this simple act of kindness would lead him on a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Thomas Cruise had spent nearly 2 decades behind the wheel of his taxi, navigating the busy streets of the city with ease. He had seen it all: drunk passengers, late-night arguments, and the occasional fare that would leave a lasting impression. But in all his years, he never expected to meet someone like Emily. Thomas had lived a simple life. He didn't have many friends, but his cab was his sanctuary. It was a place where he could escape from the world, reflect on his past, and keep to himself. He had learned to cherish the quiet moments in between fares, when he could let his mind wander without interruption. Thomas had once been a family man. He had a wife, a young daughter, and a home filled with laughter. But life had a way of throwing curveballs. His wife, Maria, had passed away suddenly from a rare illness, leaving him to raise their daughter, Lily, alone. The grief had consumed him. He threw himself into his work, hoping that the long hours would numb the pain. Lily had grown up without her mother, but Thomas had done his best to make sure she knew she was loved. They had a routine: school, dinner, bedtime stories, but deep down, Thomas knew he wasn't the same man he had been before. He was a shadow of himself, haunted by the loss of Maria. The city had become a place of solitude for him. He would see families walking together, and it would remind him of what he had lost. But it was also a place where he could be anonymous, where no one asked him about his past or expected him to be something he wasn't. And then, there was the moment that would change everything: Emily. The rain had started falling harder now, the steady downpour turning the streets into rivers. Thomas had just finished a fare and was heading toward his next destination when he saw her, standing on the corner, looking out of place. The little girl was soaked through, her clothes clinging to her thin frame. Her hands were pressed to her chest, as if she were trying to hold herself together in the face of something far greater than a storm. He couldn't ignore her. She was a child, alone in the night. He stopped the cab, rolled down the window, and called out to her. "Hey there, are you all right?" The girl turned, her face a mix of confusion and fear. She glanced at the cab, hesitated, and then rushed toward it, as if she had no other choice. Thomas opened the door, and she climbed in without a word. "Where are you headed?" he asked again, trying to keep his voice calm. "My mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I need to find my mom." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. There was something about the way she said it, so small, so vulnerable, that struck him deep. "Where's your mom, sweetie? Do you know her address?" The girl shook her head. I don't know. But I have to find her." Thomas knew this wasn't right. A little girl wandering the streets alone, looking for someone, with no idea where to go. He glanced at her more closely, noting her tear-streaked face and trembling hands. His heart ached for her. "Don't worry," Thomas said, his voice firm but kind. "We'll find her." But deep down, he had no idea where to start. The city was vast, and he was just one man with one taxi. The conflict was clear. He was up against the clock and the unknown. Was this a story of a lost child, or something far more complicated? As Thomas drove through the darkened streets, his mind raced. What was he supposed to do? He didn't have any leads, no addresses, no contacts. He had no idea where to begin. He glanced at the girl in the back seat, her face illuminated by the streetlights flashing through the windows. She was trembling, clutching her stuffed animal as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "Do you remember anything about your mom's job or where she might be?" Thomas asked gently, trying to keep his voice steady. The girl shook her head. I don't know. She told me to stay in the car. But I didn't. I was scared." Thomas's heart sank. There was something haunting in the way she spoke, something that made the situation feel much darker than he initially thought. This wasn't just a case of a child getting lost. There was fear in her eyes, a fear that ran deeper than any storm outside. Minutes turned into hours as Thomas drove from neighborhood to neighborhood, asking strangers if they had seen the little girl or heard anything about a missing child. He called the police, but they hadn't received any reports of a missing child. The streets felt endless, and Thomas's frustration began to rise. Every turn seemed to lead them farther from any kind of resolution. But then, something unexpected happened. The girl's face lit up when they passed a small, quiet street, and she pointed urgently to the left. "That's it," she exclaimed. "That's the street. My mom lives there." Thomas pulled the cab to the curb, his heart pounding. The girl opened the door before he could even park, rushing toward the house at the end of the block. It was a modest home, but something about it seemed off. He watched her run up to the front door, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. A moment later, the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She looked like she had been waiting for them, her face pale and filled with relief. But then, as she caught sight of the little girl, her expression shifted, confusion, followed by dread. The woman stepped forward, trembling. "Emily? Where have you been? I've been looking everywhere for you." It was only then that Thomas realized the truth. Emily wasn't lost. She had run away from home. As the woman embraced Emily, Thomas stood frozen in place, trying to process the situation. His instincts told him something was wrong. Why had Emily run away? What had happened inside the house to make her feel like she couldn't stay? The woman turned to Thomas, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also an unmistakable edge of fear. "Thank you for bringing her back," she said. But her voice faltered. "I don't know how to explain this." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know if he should be happy that Emily was safe or concerned about what might be going on in the home behind her. Before he could ask any questions, Emily spoke up, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to go home. I was scared." The woman's face paled even more. She reached out to Emily, but the girl pulled away. Thomas's heart raced. Something wasn't right. He could see it in Emily's eyes, and he could feel it in the air. This wasn't the happy reunion he had imagined. "Are you sure you're all right?" Thomas asked the girl softly. Emily nodded, but her face was a mask of fear. "Don't worry," Thomas said, more to himself than anyone else. "You're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore." But the truth lingered in the air, a quiet reminder that sometimes what we think we know isn't the full story. Thomas's cab ride that night was more than just a simple act of kindness. It was a turning point for both Emily and him. Though he had delivered her back home, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more needed to be done. In the following days, he learned that Emily had been running from an abusive home, one where her mother had struggled with her own demons. Thomas, with his newfound resolve, reached out to Child Protection Services, ensuring that Emily was placed in a safe environment. For the first time in years, Thomas felt a sense of purpose. His simple act of kindness had led to something greater, a child saved, a life turned around. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change someone's life. You can be the difference in someone's world today. Leave a comment below with your own story of kindness, and let's keep this chain of hope going. If you want to see more inspiring stories like this, hit that notification bell so you never miss a chance to be inspired. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes it's the smallest moments that make the biggest impact.